The mechanic gave up on the old Ford tractor. His grandson fixed it with a $5 pardon. The Ford tractor sat in the northeast corner of the equipment shed, and it hadn't moved in 11 years. That was how long Ray Delacroix had owned the place. 11 years of walking past it, of trying not to look at it, of explaining to anyone who asked that it wasn't worth the trouble. The tractor was a 1963 Ford 4000, gray and orange, and it had been parked in that corner since the summer of 1987, when the man who put it there decided he was done. That man was Walt Delacroix, Ray's father, 63 years old in the summer of 1987, farming 48 acres outside of Gilchrist County, Florida, on a piece of land the family had worked since 1941. Walt had spent 4 days on the Ford that August, 4 days with the hood up, with the manual open on the fender, with grease to the elbows and nothing to show for it. On the 5th day, he pulled it to the shed, left the keys in the ignition, never started it again. Ray inherited the land in 1994. The Ford came with it. He called a mechanic from Trenton the first year, Amos Garrett, who had been working on farm equipment in Gilchrist County since 1968. Amos drove out in his truck, walked around the Ford twice, opened the hood, closed it, told Ray the carburetor was gone, the fuel pump was suspect, and the whole ignition system had probably corroded past the point of easy repair. Said the parts alone would run $300. Labor would be more. Said a man could buy a working tractor for less than the cost of fixing this one. Ray let it sit. The shed had 12 feet of clearance on all sides of the Ford. By 1998, the clearance on the east side had filled in with old fence posts, a roll of barbed wire, and a stack of aluminum irrigation pipe that hadn't been used since the mid-1980s. The tractor wasn't just parked, it was buried. Marcus Delacroix was 16 years old in the spring of 1998, Ray's oldest son. He had been driving the farm's other tractor, a 1978 John Deere 2040, since he was 13, which was the age Ray himself had started. The Deere ran fine, pulled implements, ran the bush hog, did the work. There was no reason to mess with the Ford. Marcus found the reason on a Saturday morning in March. He had gone into the shed to get a socket wrench and noticed something he hadn't noticed before. The Ford's hood was slightly ajar, not from any disturbance, just from years of metal settling, of latches loosening, of the slow rearrangement that happened to equipment left alone too long. He opened it the rest of the way. The engine was a 158 cubic inch gasoline 4-cylinder. The Ford 4000 had used this engine from 1962 to 1964, before the line moved to larger displacement. Marcus didn't know this yet. What he knew was that the engine looked complete. No missing components he could see. No obvious damage. Rodent nesting in one corner of the air filter housing. But that was cosmetic. The block itself looked intact. He found the manual in the shed side cabinet, inside a coffee can with a rubber band around it. His grandfather's handwriting was on the cover, Ford 4000, 1963. Below it, a list of dates, service dates, going back to November 1965. The last entry was August 12th, 1987, Walt's last day with the tractor. Marcus took the manual to the house, spent that evening reading it. He brought the problem to Ray the next morning at breakfast, told him he wanted to look at the Ford. Ray said he could look all he wanted, but Amos Garrett had already looked, and Amos Garrett knew tractors, and Amos Garrett said it wasn't worth the cost. Ray said this without looking up from his coffee. Marcus said he thought the problem might be simpler than Amos said. Ray looked up then. He'd heard this before from other people about other problems, and it was usually wrong. He said Marcus could spend his weekends on it if he wanted, but not to pull parts off the Deere to try to make the Ford work. Marcus said he understood. That Saturday, Marcus started at the battery. It was dead. Completely flat, nothing on the terminals when he tested it with the meter he'd borrowed from the shop class at Trenton High. He pulled it out, set it on the workbench. A new battery wasn't the fix, but a dead battery meant he couldn't diagnose anything else without it, so the battery came first. He rode his bicycle into Trenton that afternoon, 4 miles each way on County Road 340. The battery was $34 at the co-op. He paid with his own money, 4 months of feeding calves for a neighbor at $2 a morning. The battery went in that same evening. The tractor didn't start. It cranked. The starter turned the engine, which was good, which meant the starter worked and the battery seated properly. But it wouldn't fire. Cranked and wouldn't catch. He checked fuel next. Tank was dry. He added 2 gallons from the shed's gas can. Tried again. Same result. Cranking, no combustion. The fuel system then. He pulled the fuel line from the carburetor and watched for flow. Nothing came out. Either the tank pickup was blocked or the fuel pump wasn't pulling. He cracked open the fuel pump, cleaned the diaphragm with a rag, reassembled it. Tried again. Still nothing at the carburetor inlet. The fuel pump was suspect, like Amos had said. But Marcus didn't replace it yet. He went back to the manual and read the section on fuel delivery twice. There was a sediment bowl between the tank and the pump. A glass bowl with a brass screen inside it, designed to catch debris before it reached the pump. On a tractor that had sat for 11 years, a blocked sediment bowl was a reasonable first step. He found the bowl. It was packed. Not just dirty, packed solid with rust flakes and sediment the color of reddish clay, the bottom 1/4 inch a solid plug. He unscrewed it, soaked it in solvent for 40 minutes, scrubbed the screen with a toothbrush he'd brought from the house, reassembled everything, turned the key. The engine caught on the 4th revolution, ran rough, stumbled, nearly died, then smoothed out into a lumpy idle that rattled the sheet metal of the shed. Marcus didn't move for a full minute. He just stood there with his hand on the hood, feeling the vibration. He let it run for 20 minutes before he touched anything else. The idle was rough, loping, uneven, dropping in and out. The carburetor needed cleaning. This was what Amos had said, and Amos was right about that part. Marcus pulled the carburetor that afternoon, soaked it overnight in a gallon of carburetor cleaner. The jets and passages were partially blocked with varnish, 11 years of gasoline slowly evaporating and leaving a film that hardened like shellac. He worked each passage with a strand of wire, blew them through with compressed air from the shop compressor, reassembled the carburetor the next morning. The idles smoothed out considerably. Not perfect, there was still a miss at low RPM, a hesitation between idle and acceleration. But the tractor ran. It ran, and it moved when Marcus put it in gear. And he drove it out of the shed on a Sunday afternoon in late March, into the flat spring light of Gilchrist County, for the first time in 11 years. Ray was sitting on the porch when it came out. He watched Marcus come across the yard on the old Ford, both hands on the wheel, going maybe 4 miles an hour. Ray didn't say anything. Watched the tractor complete a wide circle in the yard, return to the shed entrance, shut down. Marcus climbed off. Ray asked how much it had cost so far. Marcus said $34 for the battery. The solvent and cleaning supplies had come from the shed. Ray nodded. That was all he said. The miss was still there. Low RPM, every 3rd or 4th firing cycle. A slight stumble. Enough to matter if you were pulling an implement. Marcus drove the tractor around the property twice more that week after school, trying to feel where the miss was coming from, whether it was fuel or ignition. He suspected ignition. Varnished jets were cleaned now. Fuel delivery was good. The miss felt electrical, a spark going absent when it should fire, then returning. He pulled the distributor cap on Friday evening. The inside was lightly corroded. Green bloom on the contact points, oxidation on the rotor tip. He cleaned what he could with fine sandpaper, but the points themselves were worn. The gap was wrong. He measured it with a feeler gauge, 12/1000ths of an inch. The manual called for 22. A 10,000th gap doesn't sound like much. It was enough to cause the miss at low load. New points. That was the fix Amos hadn't gotten to. Points for a 1963 Ford 4000. Marcus called 3 auto parts stores in the county before he found them at a shop in Chiefland. The counterman said he'd have to check the back. Came back after 3 minutes with a paper envelope, the kind with a red string closure, dusty from sitting on the shelf. Said he'd had that box for 9 years and wasn't sure anyone would ever buy it. The points cost $4.80. Marcus paid and drove back to the farm with them in his jacket pocket. He set the gap to 22/1000ths, replaced the condenser while he had everything apart, another $2 for the part from the same box in Chiefland. Reset the timing with a timing light borrowed from the school shop teacher, Mr. Ellerby, who had been teaching automotive fundamentals at Trenton High for 19 years and had a complete set of diagnostic tools he loaned to students who asked properly. The Ford started on the second crank, idled smooth, revved clean through the full RPM range without a miss, without a stumble. Marcus held the throttle at half RPM for 2 minutes, listening. Nothing wrong. Everything working. Total cost, $34 for the battery, $4.80 for the points, $2 for the condenser. Everything else from materials already on the farm or borrowed from school. $40.80. He told Ray that evening. Ray asked him to say it again. Marcus said it again, $40.80, and the tractor ran clean. Ray sat with that for a moment, then asked if Marcus thought the fuel pump would need replacing. Marcus said he didn't think so. The pump was pulling fine now that the sediment bowl was clear. Might need replacing in a few years, but not now. Ray said he'd like to see it run. The next morning, Saturday, Marcus started the Ford, and Ray stood 10 feet away and watched it idle for 5 minutes. Ray had driven this tractor when he was in his 20s, had baled hay behind it, had cleared fence lines with it, had helped his father pull it from a ditch one winter when the ground was soft. He'd watched it get parked. He'd watched it sit. He walked around it once, the way Amos Garrett had 11 years before. He asked Marcus what the miss had been. Marcus said the ignition points were worn and gapped wrong. Ray said Amos hadn't mentioned points. Marcus said maybe Amos hadn't gotten that far. That was as far as either of them went with it. The Ford went back into regular use that spring. Not every day. The John Deere 2040 was still the main tractor, bigger, newer, more capable. But the Ford earned its place on the smaller jobs. Bush hogging the west fence line, where the turns were tight and the Deere's wheelbase made it awkward. Running the post hole digger on the south pasture, where the ground was sandier and a lighter tractor was easier to maneuver. Marcus used it for bush hogging on Saturday mornings through April and May. And Ray started using it in the afternoons when the Deere was occupied. By June, Lyle Cummings from the next property over had seen the Ford running and come by to ask about it. Lyle was 61, had been farming the adjacent 50 acres since 1979, and had 2 pieces of equipment sitting idle in his own shed, a mid-1960s Ford 3000 and an early 1970s Oliver tractor with a cracked manifold he'd been meaning to address for 3 years. He asked what Marcus had done to get the 4000 running. Marcus walked him through it. Sediment bowl, carburetor cleaning, points and condenser, timing reset. Lyle listened. Asked about the points specifically, where Marcus had found them, what they cost. Marcus gave him the name of the shop in Chiefland and the counterman's name. Lyle came back 2 weeks later. He'd found the points for his Ford 3000 at the same shop. Same kind of paper envelope, different part number. He'd done the gap in the timing himself, following the manual, using a borrowed timing light. His 3000 was running. He said it like a fact, not a celebration. Just running. Like it should have been. Word moved the way it moved in Gilchrist County, which was slowly and reliably. By the end of that summer, Marcus had fielded questions from 4 other farmers in the area about equipment that had sat idle. A Farmall M with a stuck governor, a 1969 Ford 5000 that wouldn't build oil pressure, a Minneapolis Moline with a stripped PTO shaft, a Massey Ferguson 135 that had been parked due to what the owner believed was a bad head gasket, but turned out to be a cracked intake manifold gasket, which was a $30 fix versus a $400 one. Marcus was 17 by then, a junior at Trenton High. He had no formal training. He had the manual, the school shop, Mr. Ellerby's tools, and the patience to read before he started pulling parts. He fixed the Farmall M in a single afternoon. The stuck governor was a matter of a clogged passage and a seized adjustment screw. 2 hours and $12 in parts. The owner, a man named Cecil Paget, who had farmed beans outside of Bell for 31 years, offered Marcus $40 for the work. Marcus took it. He wasn't charging at first. The first 2 repairs he'd done for nothing, for the experience. By August, he had a rate. Cost of parts plus $20 per hour. This was less than half what Amos Garrett charged. And Marcus didn't have a truck or a shop, just a bicycle and a toolbox, and the willingness to read the manual. Cecil Paget told 2 other farmers. Those farmers told others. Ray watched this without comment through most of that summer. He noticed things. The phone calls in the evenings, the Saturday mornings when Marcus was at a neighbor's place instead of the farm, the steady accumulation of manuals on the shelf in Marcus's room. Ford, Farmall, Massey Ferguson, Oliver, Minneapolis Moline. He noticed that Marcus had started buying individual manuals at farm auctions for 50 cents a piece, building a library of machines that mostly nobody wanted anymore. In October, Ray told Marcus he should think about what he was doing with it. Not to stop, to think about where it was going. Marcus was still in school. The work was part-time, weekends, afternoons. But Ray had done the accounting without being asked. Marcus had earned $340 in 2 months of work on equipment that experienced mechanics had passed on. Ray said this without telling Marcus what to do with it, just laid it out. Marcus said he knew. He graduated from Trenton High in May of 2000. He'd been accepted to Santa Fe College in Gainesville on an agricultural mechanics scholarship, a 2-year program, hands-on, focused on equipment diagnosis and repair. He was 18 years old. He had fixed 23 pieces of farm equipment in Gilchrist County and the adjacent counties over the previous 2 years. He had a notebook with each job documented. Equipment. Problem as presented. Actual problem found. Parts used. Cost. Time. Outcome. 23 jobs. 23 successful repairs. He hadn't failed to get anything running yet. Amos Garrett retired in 1999. Had been the main farm equipment mechanic in Gilchrist County for 31 years. When he retired, there was no one to replace him immediately. The farmers who had relied on him for decades were left calling shops in Trenton and Chiefland and Gainesville. Shops that charged more came out slower and sometimes declined jobs on equipment too old to be worth their time. Marcus came back from Santa Fe in 2002, had his 2-year certificate, moved back to the farm, set up a proper shop in the shed where the Ford had sat for 11 years, and started taking calls. He charged $60 an hour by then. Still half what the Gainesville shops charged, and he came to the farm, which the Gainesville shops would not. He had diagnostic equipment, a compression tester, an oscilloscope from a shop closure sale. A complete set of metric and standard tools acquired over 4 years of savings. He had manuals for 93 different makes and models of equipment. He had a waiting list within 8 months. The Ford 4000 was still running in 2002. Still in the shed at Ray's farm, still getting used on the tight fence lines and the post hole work. The battery Marcus had put in had been replaced once, in 2001, when it finally failed. The points he'd installed in 1998 were still in place. He'd cleaned and re-gapped them once in 2000 when he noticed the idle going slightly rough. They were still within spec. Ray stopped by the shop one afternoon in the fall of 2002. Marcus was rebuilding a carburetor from a 1975 Allis-Chalmers 7000. Ray watched for a while, then asked how much the original repair on the Ford had come to. Marcus said he still had the notebook, pulled it from the shelf. First entry, March 1998. Ford 4000, 1963. Problem as presented. Won't start, hasn't run in 11 years. Mechanic previously consulted. Garrett, A. Previous assessment, carburetor gone, fuel pump suspect, ignition system corroded. Estimated repair, $300 parts, labor additional. Actual problem found, battery dead, sediment bowl blocked, carburetor varnished, ignition points worn and gapped wrong. Parts used, battery $34, points 480, condenser 2.0. Total 4080, time 11 hours over 3 weeks. Outcome, running. Ray read it, handed the notebook back. Said the assessment on the ignition system had been correct. It was corroded. Just not past repair. Marcus said there was a difference between corroded and done. Ray said he supposed there was. The old Ford 4000 is still on the property. Marcus took it over when Ray moved off the farm in 2011, when Ray was 67 and his knees made the ladder up to the Deere's cab harder than it used to be. The tractor is 41 years old now, still starts, still runs the fence lines in the spring. The engine has been rebuilt once. Marcus did it himself in the winter of 2007. A full overhaul, new rings and bearings, valve job. 40 hours of work spread over 6 weeks. Cost him $280 in parts. The ignition points that cost $4.80 in March of 1998 ran until 2004, 6 years. Marcus replaced them with an electronic ignition conversion kit that eliminated the points entirely, $67, and he'd never have to gap them again. The condenser from 1998 is still in place. Never failed. Amos Garrett passed away in 2008. His son called Marcus that fall, asked if Marcus would be interested in buying Amos's old truck and toolbox. Marcus bought the toolbox, paid $200 for it. Inside were Amos's own notes, a worn spiral notebook, grease-stained, 40 years of jobs recorded in the same kind of shorthand Marcus had been using since 1998. Marcus looked through it. Amos had worked on a lot of Fords over the years. Had a note for a 4000 from 1989, job never completed, customer's farm, Gilchrist County. Note said, carburetor gone, fuel pump suspect, ignition corroded, estimate declined, too far gone. Marcus recognized the address. It was Ray's farm, his grandfather's tractor. He kept the notebook. It's on the shelf in the shop between the Ford manual and the Farm All Red, next to the first notebook Marcus ever kept, the one that starts with the Ford 4000 in March 1998. The tractor that couldn't be fixed with $40.80 worth of parts. Still running, still working.